Okay, so our next video is looking at the theory of oligopoly. Now, as you remember from the previous videos, we looked at the two different extremes of competition. Those extremes being one being perfect competition, the other then being monopoly. Perfect competition whenever you have many small firms, small relative to the size of the industry. The firm was a price taker, and the monopoly then being the other extreme, the other end of the spectrum, which we had one sole firm that dominates the industry, and we said there was only one large firm in that actual industry. We said the firm was the industry. Oligopoly then, a form of imperfect competition. Oligopoly is a difficult and sort of tricky one to get your head around, because there are sort of degrees of uncertainty as to what actually constitutes an oligopolistic market structure, but we'll go through some of the key elements that you need to know for oligopoly. Okay, so first and foremost, with oligopoly, we're looking at a small number of large firms. So we sort of deem these firms to be small in terms of the number of firms, but the actual size of the firms are relatively large. Okay, now the key point that I want you to take away from this with oligopoly is this word here: they are dominating the industry. Okay, so these small number of large firms, they are dominating that particular industry. So there's more than one firm. Okay, but those firms, they own quite a lot of the market share. Okay, so you look, for example, your banks. You may think, well, there is actually quite a good number of banks out there, but the number of banks, maybe compared to the number of farmers, is very different. We're looking at those firms that dominate the market, and we're also looking at that degree of concentration as well. We measure dominance by the concentration ratio. Okay. So we're looking at we're looking at, say, for example, the three firm concentration ratio. We want to add together the market structure of the three dominating firms in that industry. So the three firms in the industry with the largest market share, we add those together. Let's say, for example, if we added the three firms together and it came to, let's say, 70%. Well, 70% of that industry is owned by only three firms, a small number of large firms, and they are dominating that industry with that degree of concentration. Okay, so always just bear that in mind. And using words like dominating, concentration, always very good for analysis. Oligopoly firms are not price makers like monopoly. Now, they're not price takers either. There is a bit of, a sort of a difference between monopoly and monopolistic market structures. Okay, so we say that oligopolies, now they would have more control over price maybe than some other market structures. Okay, notably they'd have more control over price than perfect competition, but they're not deemed to be, not theory-wise anyway, they're not deemed to be price makers. But some oligopoly firms, because of their large degree of dominance, would be sort of deemed as having some control over price. Okay, now whenever we look at the Kinked demand curve, we will look at, well, in actual fact, they can change price, but what would the impact of that be? Would it really be in the best interests of the organisation? They can be described as price seekers, if anything, and again, once we look at the Kinked demand curve, that'll become apparent to us, this concept of price seeking behaviour. One firm wants to be sort of the leader of the number of firms. They either want to be the one with, look, we're the largest firm, but we can offer the lowest price. Okay, and they will change their price depending, going back again, to their business objectives and where their position is in the industry. If you've got two dominant firms against each other, well then, they would be sort of price seeking to see who is the best prices. This is because their price elasticity of demand is less predictable. Okay, now, whenever we looked at this concept of being less predictable, again, we look at this degree of uncertainty within the industry, as you might remember from lessons. It's less predictable because one minute, we could be selling that good or service. The next, your competitors might drop the price of that good or service by a small amount, and as a result, then your demand now has ultimately decreased. Okay, it depends on that. Is it elastic or inelastic? And again, that links us on to the Kinked demand curve. But again, very good analysis will be linking back to this concept of price elasticity of demand. Now, with the Kinked demand curve, we are interested not necessarily in profit, particularly the simple Kinked demand curve. We're not looking at costs, we're not looking at average costs, we're not looking even at marginal cost. We look at that with the discontinuous marginal revenue curve. With oligopoly, we're interested in this concept of total revenue. How does total revenue change as a result of changing or increasing or decreasing price. So total revenue can be reduced either by increasing or decreasing price because of the kinked demand curve. Okay, now if you're drawing the kinked demand curve, you should always be reiterating back to this point of increasing and decreasing total revenue, because that's essential to show on your diagram. It's not necessarily a difficult diagram. It's quicker maybe to draw, but you can really use that diagram to support your discussion, and it shows that concept of interdependence. Just as it flows in this here, it depends on interdependence. Now, if you've got a question on oligopoly, you include this phrase, interdependence is essential. We need to let the examiners know that, look, here's a really good piece of terminology. I know what interdependence is. You should be reiterating that to the examiners. Interdependence being how the actions of one firm affect the actions of another. Okay, so if one firm changes their price, how will other firms react? If one firm closes down, how will other firms react? If one firm changes their nature of products, changes the quality of their products, how will other firms react? Okay, think about it logically. If you're in a business, you're in business to meet the needs and expectations of your customers. If your competitors could do that slightly better, that's going to affect your business. And so you need to change your business operations to match that and to sort of compete with that organisation. The stress of uncertainty can be reduced by collusion, which is deemed to be illegal. Now, because of this, the actions of one firm affect the actions of another, notably to do with price. We're more interested in price merely than anything else. Because of this degree of uncertainty, if one firm knows that, look, if tomorrow they went and decreased their prices, we could be making a loss by tomorrow. We could lose our customers just like that. Okay. What are we going to do about that? It's very uncertain. Okay, there's a large degree of risk involved with oligopoly. Particularly, we talk about this sort of abusive behaviour between one firm and the next. We look at how one firm could be maybe on its knees, for example, almost on the brink of bankruptcy. If another firm found this out, another competing firm in the oligopoly market structure, they found that out, they could use that to their advantage. They could then lower their prices in the short run to push that firm out of the market, and ultimately then they would get them out of the market and they would take their market share because of their ruthless, business-like, profit-maximising behaviour. Collusion, okay, firms saying, look, let's not compete, let's collude. Firms have two choices in oligopoly. They can compete or they can collude. If they compete, they go through this period of uncertainty, okay, as a result of interdependence. If they didn't decide to compete, they would have to collude, and by colluding they reduce uncertainty. By colluding, they simply say to each other, right, let's all set price. Let's all set a high price now. You're not going to lose out, you're not going to lose out, we're all going to be fine. Okay? Collusion is illegal. Okay, so firms cannot collude depending on the nature of the industry. Firms might use non-price competition, okay, and product differentiation. So in perfect competition, we said all goods were homogeneous, for example. Well, in oligopolistic markets, we use non-price competition. So a carton of milk will be the same in Sainsbury's as it would be in Tesco's, for example, with slight product differentiation, but maybe through branding might be slightly different. But Tesco's might be open later than Sainsbury's, so you might want to go to Tesco's instead. Tesco's might be better laid out, better loyalty rewards, for example. The prices may more or less be the same, but they use non-price competition. And that sort of links with your concept sort of evaluation for collusion. A collusion can be good because it creates stable prices, but ultimately, they may collude and think, right, that's fine, we'll all get an equal share, but you still can get a bit of competition in there through non-price competition. You might say, look, in the colluded group, I'm selling the same price as you, but you can't stop me from opening my shop later than yours. Firms will always still, to some degree, want to compete. Collusion doesn't last forever. Collusion can break down. Branding is a key feature then of oligopoly. Okay, so your banks brand or supermarkets brand. The key thing you should take for oligopoly is interdependence and uncertainty. How firms dominate the industry, their degree of concentration, their elasticity of demand being less predictable, this concept of the kinked demand curve. If you were to merge all that together, you're simply what we are most interested in looking at with oligopoly is the behaviour and conduct of that industry. Why whenever one firm changes their price, why do other firms react? How do they react? Why would firms collude? What is the reasoning behind colluding? Why, whenever one firm decreases their price, why would other firms act in the same nature? Why would they follow suit? What would the reasons behind that be? Why would they brand? Why would there be non-price competition? Okay, so behaviour and conduct, and using that behaviour and conduct model is very important for oligopoly in the nature of this concept. Okay, so behaviour and conduct, interdependence, uncertainty, price determination. Keep those points in view. Also go over your notes in class as well that we were looking at with some of those different areas as the characteristics behind oligopoly. Okay. Now that we've got our key points, we've sort of gone over those, and again I'll be making reference to these as I go through the rest of the video. I'm going to spend a bit of time now looking at this concept of the kinked demand curve. Now, I'm going to start off with the very basic kinked demand curve, and then I'm going to do my changes in the price level. Okay, so we have two assumptions that we look at with oligopoly. The first one being that if the firm chooses to raise its prices, okay, if the firm decides to increase its prices, then other firms will not raise their prices. Okay. The other assumption would be if one firm then lowers its prices, then other firms will also lower theirs. And we are interested in the kinked demand curve, a price determination, okay, in terms of not necessarily how price is determined in the first place, but how prices can change as a result of the actions of other firms. So it's this concept of interdependence that we're interested in. And we look at this concept of the kinked demand curve. Now, to start us off, again, as I said to you in the last video, we're looking at the basics behind our diagrams. We're going to start off first of all by labelling our axes. So our y-axis is simply just price, x-axis then is quantity, and our 0 in the corner. Again, very basic to our AS microeconomics, whenever we were looking at the relationship between price and quantity. Now, first thing I'm going to do, now one of the issues with oligopoly and the kinked demand curve is it doesn't show price determination. It shows how prices change, but it doesn't show how prices are determined, for example, in the industry or for the individual firm, as what the other diagrams for perfect competition and monopoly showed us. This is the way that I do kinked demand curves, and you might want to sort of go through this process yourself if you think maybe it helps. Because we don't know how it's determined, we have to sort of accept a price level of some sort. Just do a dot like that, somewhere roughly in the middle of your diagram. Okay. Now, we look at two sections of the kinked demand curve, one being elastic, the other being inelastic. First thing I want you to do is simply just do your dashed lines to show our price level, and then our dashed line then for our quantity level. So that becomes P1 and that becomes Q1. Okay. Now, going back to that first assumption, okay, if one firm raises its price, then other firms will not raise theirs. Okay, so that as a result becomes elastic, meaning that if one firm was to increase its prices, well, what would customers do? They would switch then to other firms because there is a degree of substitutes in the oligopolistic market structure. Okay, perfect competition, there were many substitutes. Monopoly, there was none or very limited, depending on what nature of monopoly you were looking at. Oligopoly, there is substitutes. If you don't like the prices in Tesco's, you can go to Sainsbury's, you can go to Asda, you can go to Morrison's, there are other substitutes out there for you to go to. So we simply then draw on, try keep it as elastic as possible, an elastic demand curve. Okay, now tip for the exam, just simply list this as, or title that, sorry, as being elastic. Now note, going back to basic AS economics and microeconomics, if we were to increase the price, let's say for example we increase the price to here, okay, move across here, well, demand has fallen at a greater proportion than the increase in price. So we've increased price slightly, but demand has changed at a far greater state, okay? So it wouldn't be worthwhile for a firm to increase its price because it'd only lose out on demand. If the firm then was to lower its prices, okay, all other firms would do the same because they want to remain in the industry. If one firm lowered its prices, well then all other customers in competing firms, they would leave the competing firm and go to you because you're now the cheapest provider of that good or service. And it's likely you'll all be selling more or less the similar type of good, only it might have a different brand name, it might be slightly differentiated in terms of product differentiation. So how do we illustrate that then? This is our kink. We then draw on then our inelastic section of the demand curve. So our downward sloping inelastic, and that is our inelastic section of the demand curve. So we're inelastic here, we kink at this point, and then we become then more elastic here, and we become more inelastic. Now, one thing I took from the mock exam in particular, and from various different pieces of homeworks and tests, we can do this okay, but this simple thing here, D equals AR. Folks, make sure you label that. Demand equals average revenue. Keep it right. You will lose marks if you don't label that. So it's a very silly thing to do if you don't label it. Now, the very basic kink demand curve, and that's all I'm going to draw now for this diagram. But on this diagram, we're looking at this degree of how, almost price stability to some degree. Firms won't increase prices because they're going to lose demand. Firms won't decrease prices because they're not going to gain enough demand. They're going to lose revenue, whatever way they look at this. Okay? So, very, very basic and simple kinked demand curve. Okay? Make sure you know this before we move on. At this stage, I'm going to move on now to the looking at revenue with kinked demand curves. You might want to maybe pause this for a second and just study this. If you're happy enough now with that, as I said to you again, we're interested in this concept of behaviour and conduct. We're also interested in this impact on total revenue. Now, for perfect competition and monopoly, we are interested in this. Well, firms making supernormal profits. Are they not making supernormal profits? How could they increase or decrease those supernormal profits? What would be the impact of some actions, for example, on making supernormal profits? With the kinked demand curve theory, we are interested in this degree of, we are interested in this concept or this degree of looking at total revenue and the changes in total revenue. Now, what I'm going to do, the diagram to the left-hand side, I'm going to show the impact of an increase in price, and I'm going to look at how that changes or affects the kinked demand curve. So I'm going to do an increase in price. The one then on the right, I'm going to do then a decrease in price. Okay, bring this down a bit. Okay, increase in price and a decrease in price. Again, just our price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis, on our 0 in the corner. Okay, go ahead and just draw your basic kinked demand curve. Okay, showing our elastic section here, and then our inelastic. Okay, so D equals AR. That's Q1, and that's P1. Now, I'm going to use a green pen now to show the differences now between both. Now, if I was to increase price, slightly, I'm going to show a small increase in the price level here on the elastic section of the kinked demand curve. Okay, so that now becomes P2. Do then your dashed lines. Q2. Now let's just stop for a second and see what's actually in front of us and what this is actually showing us. Now, one firm has decided to increase its prices. Okay, now in oligopoly, as I said to you before, there are substitutes. When one firm increases its prices, customers will think, well, I'm not paying that. I'm going to go to another competitor because there are other competitors in the industry. As a result of that, they're going to lose a vast amount of customers. Now, in terms of revenue, the yellow area here is the area of revenue gained. Okay, so this is revenue gained. So the firm gains this small yellow area. Okay, so the firm has actually increased its revenue. We think, okay, great, the firm increases its revenue. Surely they should increase price. But looking at the nature of elasticity, by increasing revenue, yes, they've gained this area here, but look what happened to quantity. Quantity has decreased at a greater extent than the increase in price. So the percentage increase in price is much smaller than the percentage change in quantity demanded. Quantity demanded has decreased quite dramatically in comparison to the increase in the percentage change in price. So this area now I'm shading in blue is, in actual fact, as I'm sure you already know already, is our revenue lost. Okay, as a result of increasing price, the firm has lost more revenue than what it has gained. Okay, so they've gained this yellow area, but they've lost this blue area. The area of loss is greater than the area of gain. Other firms will not increase their price. Competing firms will not increase their price. If anything, one firm in oligopoly increasing their price will be like a godsend for other firms, because it's like, great, I know their customers will switch. They'll now come to us because we are now the cheaper providers in that industry. Okay, and as a result, competing firms will see an increase in their customers, which is great for them. Okay, now, in terms of how the actions of one affect the actions of another, the actions of this firm was to increase price. The actions of other firms was to keep their price the same. Okay, so just remember that to help you with interdependence. One firm increased their price, that's how they acted. Other firms acted by keeping their prices the same. Okay, they did not they did not increase or change their prices because they are now seen as the cheaper provider. Diagram now to the right hand side, we're looking at a decrease in the price of the good. So again, very quickly, see if you can draw this quick. You can try and beat me on how quickly you can draw these diagrams. I'm going to draw this relatively quick. And we've got our elastic section here and our downward sloping inelastic section. And that's AR equals D, Q1 and P1. Okay, so it didn't take me that long to do that. If we're interested now in decreasing price, so we're going to take, let's say for example, this firm is going to decrease price. Let's say it decreases price quite dramatically. Now you might remember, particularly those of you that did AS, that I had the privilege of teaching AS business to. We always looked at how firms could remain competitive. They remain competitive by decreasing their prices. Okay, not always profitable. Not always good for revenue for the firm either. But this firm now decides to decrease its price from P1 to P2. The actions of this firm is to decrease its price. It wants to remain competitive. It might think, well, great, we'll lower prices. Everyone's going to come to us. That's not the case. Because there is a degree of interdependence in oligopoly, when one firm lowers its prices, all other firms in oligopolistic industries, they will respond by saying, well, look, we're going to have to decrease our price if we want to remain competitive. So they'll decrease theirs as well. So where price was originally at P1, one firm will decrease to P2. Every other firm will decrease their prices as well. And because of that, simply customer numbers remain the same. If you decrease your price, you might experience an increase maybe in new customers who maybe never bought from you or your competitors before. If you decrease your price, all other firms will follow suit to simply remain in the industry. So in actual fact, you don't see a massive increase in demand because demand is seen to be relatively inelastic. So go to this point now. Q1 to Q2, price has decreased, quantity has increased. But again, I'm interested in this concept of total revenue and the impact on total revenue. So this area here and this area, the one I'm going to shade in now in yellow, and then the one then in blue. Again, as I said to you in the previous videos, you don't have colours in the exam. You can simply label this as A, maybe in this then as B, for example, and then you can make reference to that in your discussions. Area A, or the yellow area here, with decreased price. As a result, this is actually an area of revenue lost. So revenue lost. The blue area then is an area of revenue gained. So it's almost like the opposite of the previous diagram. Okay. So this area, by decreasing price, we haven't gained much custom, and our competitors have all followed suit. We've now lost more revenue than what we have gained. So either option, either to increase price or decrease price, it has not been profitable or beneficial in terms of the impact on revenue for firms. It's not positive on the impact of revenue for firms. So there's no point in doing it. Oligopolistic firms will not do it because it does not benefit them in any way, and they know that. Okay. Now, with this one in particular, if one firm decreases its prices, all other firms are more or less forced to decrease their prices as well. So if these firms maybe think, oh look, everything's going well, and all of a sudden your competitor decreases their price, you have to decrease yours. That's going to affect you quite dramatically, particularly depending on how well your organisation is and how well you've managed your organisation. Okay. So firms will make decisions based on a concept called interdependent decision making. Okay. Firms must take into account the likely reactions and actions of their rival to any change in price, output, or forms of non-price competition. Okay, so how other firms react, how other firms actually act in that industry. Again, well, if that is the case, particularly for this diagram here, well, what can firms do about it? How can firms reduce this degree of this degree of uncertainty? They can do that through collusion. Okay, where they might merge and say, well, look, we're all going to keep price at P1. Don't increase it, don't decrease it, keep it at P1. And as a result, no one's going to lose out here. We're going to maintain our profits, we're going to maintain our revenues. There's not going to be any issues with people or organisations trying to outdo the other. Some final points I just want to bring to your attention. Consider the incentive to increase or decrease price. Again, going back to that behaviour of the firm, the incentive might be, well, look, you're in a position where you can suffer a loss of revenue in the short term if it means you can push a competitor out. So you might think, right, I'll suffer a loss of revenue in the short term if I can get rid of my local competitor or my closest competitor. If I can get them out of the industry, make them go bust, for example. Okay, that really ruthless behaviour. Once you've got them out, then you can increase your price again. You can increase your revenue. You'll increase your revenue because your competitor who went bust, their customers will then switch to you. So consider then the incentive to compete in that industry, and also the incentive to collude. To collude, we're fed up with this degree of we don't know what's going on in the industry. It's too uncertain. Firms then will join together. Okay, they will act together. They won't merge their company together. Merging and collusion are two different things. Merging is two companies becoming one. Collusion is firms working together. They're all still separate firms. So Asda, Sainsbury's, Tesco, for example, they're all different separate firms. They've all separate board of directors. They've all separate shareholders. They're not merging together. They're simply just working and acting together. They're doing that, and reiterate this in your exam, for joint profit maximization. Okay, firms want to collude together for joint profit maximization. Some points of evaluation then, what you need to look at, well, oligopoly, they provide a degree of choice for customers. They create price stability with P1, okay, because firms won't increase or decrease price, or they're reluctant to increase or decrease price because of the actions and the impact it has on revenue. It creates price stability. Branding, product differentiation, dynamic efficiency can be quite strong in oligopolistic markets. Where oligopolies do not work in favour of customers is whenever there is collusion. And what are we going to do about it whenever there is collusion? Well, governments need to intervene. Governments need to introduce competition policy to avoid collusion. Governments set up various different bodies to protect customers' rights and to protect customer trust and ensure that customers are getting the fair and best treatment from their companies as possible. If firms were to collude, then they would form then a virtual monopoly and they would monopolise the industry, and governments may not want that. Okay, so just bear those points in mind to help you with your analysis and your evaluation. I do hope that has helped to sort of conquer any fears or address any issues with the Kinked demand curve. Just keep studying it over and over again. Draw it over and over again. The key to this is study. Okay, keep revising and studying over your notes.